France announces something that shouldn't be that surprising from France, and that is that women athletes participating in the Olympics, if you're representing France, you cannot wear hijab. And their argument is, oh, this is a funky argument. Their argument is, we want to support religious freedom. And the way we support religious freedom is by taking all of it, all the religious stuff out of the public square, taking all the religious stuff out of anything you do as a public servant. We're all secular over here. And so we don't want people getting their heads beat over with religion. We don't want to make people struggle and fight over religion. We don't want to impose religion. So everything is secular. So that means Muslim women, no hijab. For some people, that's a good argument. For other people, that is the worst kind of Islamophobia possible. So I was like, who can I bring in to help me make sense of this? And not only did I bring in Shireen Ahmed because she is just brilliant in general, but I also brought in Shireen Ahmed, who joins me now, because she wrote this incredibly important piece that you can see here in CBC called French Hijab Ban in Sports, called A Shameful Moment as it prepares to host the Olympics. It touts parity, but true equality seems to be a different matter. Shireen, thank you for joining me. So the first thing I would, just for the sake of my audience, what is a hijab ban?
So essentially, and thank you for having me to speak on this. So this is your first lesson, y'all, in shenanigans, French style. This is what this is. This is a bunch of nonsense that's being represented and presented as secularism, which actually is in French, it's called laïcité, which is really important to their French identity. But basically, it's absolutely discriminating against Black and brown Muslim women who choose to cover. That's what this is. Now, I just wanted to make one clarification. This isn't only specific to the Olympics. It hurts and hits hard right now because the Olympics start next week. But this applies to all sport in French society. Yes. So it's overwhelmingly terrible. I just think it's important to discuss it now, because media that is, most often useless in covering these kinds of topics because nobody cares about Black and brown Muslim women athletes, it's a good time to bring it up now. So this hasn't only started. It's been in process. They've been excluding women from French society through policing dress codes for a very long time. And so this is, I'm really appreciative to be able to talk to your viewers and listeners about this, because it is not only demoralizing, it is incredibly discriminating and against the Olympic Charter. The irony being the Olympics and this gender parity business. Yeah, but not if you're Black or brown and want to wear a hijab. Sorry, too bad for you.
So this is such an important point. You're making a lot of really, really important points here. First thing is the idea that secularism is central to French national identity. Right? The state claims that we are a secular nation. Now, why is that not? Because people are going to hear that and say, well, that sounds good to me. Religion is messy. Religion is problematic. Most governments try to impose the state religion either explicitly in certain religious states, or in the United States, where we kind of smuggle in a kind of Christian-centered culture. We close on Christmas. We don't close for Eid up until maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, public schools, things like that. So what's wrong with saying everybody's secular? Nobody's religion gets involved in the public square.
So And this point's really important. And I want to quote Dr. Haifa Tlili. She's a sociologist who was foundational in advocacy here. She co-founded Basket pour Toutes. It's an organization, a group of basketball players that are really lobbying the French Basketball Association to allow hijab in sport there at all. Because don't forget, if you want to play professional ball in France, you can't if you want to wear hijab. And there are ballers. People were like, Muslim women wear hijab and play basketball. Yeah, sorry. That's 2012, that conversation. We're way past that conversation. We know right. That. Muslim women in hijab and abayas are out here breaking ankles all the time. So we're not going to get into that. And if you don't know that, then go to TikTok and look for it. So that we're way past that. So the point is, secularism on its face is not a bad principle if it is evenly applied. That is not the case in France. Come on, anybody watch the Euros or watch World Cup, you see all these Catholic players going off and on the pitch, signing, whether it's the cross or signing whatever, have religious tattoos that are not covered. It is not evenly applied. I mean, these are things we have to think about fairly. But you're saying that a Muslim woman's scarf is an impediment. Now, the other thing, an impediment to this freedom, this liberty, this fraternity, those are the three, égalité, fraternité, and liberté are the three principles of France. But it's almost like they're so scared of the power and the possibility of Muslim women being there and taking over. And the problem is with this, and I do want to emphasize that every basketball federation in the world now permits hijab, the major ones. Basketball was overturned in 2017, the hijab ban. FIFA was overturned 2014. I know this. And we all remember Nohaila Benzina of Morocco, who played in the Women's World Cup last year in Australia. I was there covering that tournament. And it was a big deal. Everybody was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And where are you all now talking about France? Where are you now? That was the same issue. And I made this point last year because people kept saying, this is so great for sport. Yes, but why has that changed now? Suddenly, because France is hosting, now you're all like going to be quiet because they're excluding. And the worst part is France couldn't ban hijab outright. You cannot do that because it's against the Olympic Charter, which specifies you can't discriminate against race, age, color, status, beliefs, political or social, otherwise. They're doing that, but they happen to be the hosts. So they decided to ban their own athletes. It was like, what? Even the United Nations was like, this is ridiculous.
Crazy, right?
Amnesty International released a report on Monday talking about that. And if you read the letter, that was a reply from the IOC. It is part of what we've come to expect from the IOC in terms of having no backbone. I mean, they won't talk about a genocide. You think they're going to talk about this?
It's a fair point. And I think it's worth noting, as you said, it's not just Olympic sport, it's all sport, but it's not just sport. Schools in France are struggling with this issue, right? Or I should say Muslim women and girls in schools are struggling with this issue, where again, the state is saying we want to be this zone of liberty, but as you said, it's actually in practice simply an Islamophobic issue. There are going to be people watching this who are going to say, in fact, some of them are in the audience right now watching, they're going to say the hijab itself is a form of oppression. And so we need to, and so France is actually doing y'all a favor by liberating you from the oppression of women having to have their bodies covered. They're going to look at you, Shireen, in hijab, and they're going to say, you are an example of this and you just don't see it.
Yeah, I'm a university instructor. I have a national platform for sports and international platform. I'm not worried about my oppression. You don't need to be worried about my oppression. Secondly, I'm not interested in anybody telling me what I can wear or cannot wear. And I'll be very clear to say this. Forcing women out of clothing is as violent as forcing them into it. When did we start to okay policing bodily agency in terms of sport? Historically, that has always been the case, however, because people who make up these rules, the majority are men. But this particular law in France is really tricky because it's being upheld by white feminists in France who argue that hijab is oppressive. And the thing is that religious freedom is a right to be able to express yourself in whatever way, whatever clothing you feel. And the argument that, hijab is dangerous, it's not true, because that's the argument that they made to ban it from FIFA. So France isn't even pretending like they're trying to avoid danger and its safety. They don't care. They're very happy to say, no, you just can't be here, and ignoring everything else. And the IOC has said, well, we're going to defer to the federation, the French Olympic Committee, the organizing country, the host nation, and let them deal how they define and how they interpret religious freedom, which is unbelievable to me that it's a country that really prides itself on the one hand, they pride themselves in giving women reproductive rights, which is really important, particularly if I'm speaking to an American audience. There is legitimacy in having that and having bodily agency. But on the other hand, you're like, no, I get to tell you what you can and cannot wear. That's a false equivalence. I'm sorry. You don't get to tell women that they have to be free in ways A, B, and C. That's actually not how freedom works, people. Not in France, not anywhere else. You don't get to tell a woman what she can and cannot wear on a court in a public sphere. But this conversation is about sport. So we'll keep it there. It's not dangerous. It's not objecting. Nobody is propagating a faith. They're covering as they see fit. There's people and athletes in volleyball who have now started to wear rash guards because of sun, and they're worried about sun. There needs to be uniform accommodation for people who want to cover. You're allowed to play professional. I actually interviewed Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, when she was in Toronto for an exhibition game last year. And I asked her about this, and she says that wouldn't happen. And just to be even more clear, you've got athletes from the W, like Brianna Stewart, Laisha Clarendon, Natasha Cloud. They signed this letter asking, an open letter asking and demanding that the French Basketball Federation allow players to play with hijab. So this isn't about safety or anything else. We see D1 players like Diaba Kanouté, who is from France, playing at UC Irvine. We saw her. She got Defensive Player of the Year in the West. Like, so, you know what? These arguments, I'm not going to accept that. At the end of the day, you don't want me to what I want to wear on the court. That's actually not a me problem. That's a you problem. But France has made it everyone's problem.
What do women athletes do in this situation? And I know you can't sort of speak for them in terms of their own agency or choices, but you're left with a hell of a dilemma, right? I mean, you compete for the gold medal and win, and violate whatever religious or personal principle you have or requirement you may feel you have, or just like, I'm not going to let France control my body, right? At that level. Do you win? Do you take the gold medal and let them and sacrifice all that? Do you walk away? How are Muslim women, particularly in France, sort of, how are they thinking through this? How are they talking about this kind of thing?
And that's a really fair question. And what I can tell you is the dozens of women that I've spoken to, and this isn't a dilemma that's only specific to France. I mean, some of y'all might know the story of a Belkis Abdul Qadir who, played who played NCAA Division I. She had a documentary called Life Without Basketball. She actually was the one that really pushed, she and a campaign of other people pushed to have, because I reported on this all, pushed to have FIBA allow hijab. And so to have to choose, and this actually happened to me in my university soccer career, because I decided to wear hijab at the same time, and I played on the varsity team at university, and you have to choose between sport, and for a lot of the women, they walk away. Now in France, there's a group of women have decided they're not going to do that. They're going to keep fighting and keep fighting. And with social media and with education, it's a lot more plausible, because I'm very old, so we didn't have all that when I was in university. So, but now with the opportunity to have conversations like this one, the other problem with this is a lot of people simply don't know. Just because the Olympic Committee, the IOC, comes out with saying gender parity, and all the feminists clap their hands about it. Look, if you want to talk about equity or equality for women and gender, you have to take race into consideration. No one's here for a conversation that doesn't have those layers, and nobody's interested. I'm certainly not interested in that. I mean, you can clap your hands all day and say, yay, women, but if it doesn't represent communities that I'm advocating for that are on the margins, I'm not interested in that conversation. And that is uncomfortable. It makes sports people uncomfortable, because you end up being a killjoy. Again, I'm not here. This is about justice. And quite frankly, the IOC's own charter that guarantees inclusion is simply not happening from the host country. It's egregious, and people don't know about it.
Yeah. I think about so many American imperialist projects and how they're grounded in this idea of femo-nationalism, this idea that we're going to go and take over this country to rescue the women. I think Gayatri Spivak talked about it as, American imperialism in general kind of being like white men saving brown women from brown men. This idea that you're so oppressed and you don't even know it, we're going to save you. And how that can become the pretext for all kinds of other kind of notions of oppression. again, I don't want to put other people's thoughts in your head or your thoughts on other people's, but why the hell is this so persuasive? I guess I just keep wondering with why do people buy this? This seems so obviously jacked up to me. But when we're like Operation Iraqi Freedom, or we're gonna go to Afghanistan and free the women, or we gotta go here and liberate, but only liberate places where they got oil, or we have strategic interests. There's a whole lot of liberation that can happen in a whole lot of places. But we're very particular about who we want to liberate.
This sounds like some Nicholas Kristof bullshit. Like that's what it sounds like.
Yep.
Like nobody's interested in that kind of like Muslim women don't need you to free them. You just need to get out the way. Get out of the way, please. Don't create false narratives around Muslim. Look, I'm not here to pretend that women aren't forced into clothing. That's absolutely true. In certain regions of the world, the violent toxicity and masculinity really is harmful. I'm not saying that, but you don't solve that by going around the world, halfway around the world, and saying, well, you're not allowed to wear hijab. The point is, you don't get to decide. Nobody should tell women what they can and cannot be wearing. I don't care if it's a burkini, a bikini, or a burqa. I don't care. Give women the right and the choice, particularly in sport, to be able to wear it what they want. And this also goes for, and some of your viewers might remember this, when the Norwegian beach handball team, and this is during the Tokyo Olympics, decided to wear longer shorts because they were mandated by their federation to wear like a thong basically. And then everyone was in uproar about it. And Pink said, well, if they're fined, because the players were fined, Pink, the rock star, was like, I'll take care of all their fines. And then I remember thinking to myself, and I wrote about this, where is all this noise for women who want to cover? Are y'all just only going to care if certain women want to wear more clothing? Like, what is this about? It's the same thing. It's about taking away women's agency. It's about not giving them the choice. And it's about imposing whatever colonial beliefs you have. Also, there is no evidence that wearing a hijab is detrimental in terms of safety. Like, so that argument is not even valid. And there's a long history in sport of federations of men mostly controlling what women wear. For the longest time, tennis players, field hockey players could only wear skirts. And that again is rooted. And Muslim women get it worse. Remember what they did with Serena trying to wear a black hatsuit? It's the same thing. It's worse for black and brown women and the way they're treated and disrespected. Yeah.
Before you go, a question comes in from the audience as well. Bullet the Bunny writes in and says, would Shireen mind breaking down the logistics of enforcement of this trash? Have there been any efforts to strike by other athletes? Thank you.
I think it's a really important question to understand, but at the same time, there have been those who have advocated, like there's a group called Les Hijabers, there've been individuals, there've been athletes who have actually stepped away and started wearing hijab afterwards. And Mark, this goes back to your question. In the moment, it can only be unbearable to have to make that choice. You choose between the sport you love and your faith and your identity. And it's a choice that people shouldn't have to make. And in terms of enforcement, they're simply not allowed. Like, I remember a couple years ago, and some of your viewers may remember, that women who were on the beach in France had their burkini hijabs pulled off violently by police. So there's actual violent enforcement of this, and it's really dangerous. So women are not allowed to participate. They're not allowed to go to a gym. They're not allowed to just work out if they're wearing a hijab. They're harassed, they're catcalled if they're on a street trying to run. Now, there are groups of women that get together and play like pickup and whatnot. But it's like, and there's also athletes, and I mentioned this in my column for CBC Sports, where there's athletes who leave France. There's one who left, and she decided to play for her parents' native Algeria. She's like, I'm out. I'm not sticking around here. Like, there's no possibility for growth in who you authentically want to be. Why would you stay?
Right. That's a great point. And of course, there's a way that their labor as athletes in particular is valued, or at least exploited. I don't know if valued is even the right word, but they see they recognize the value of it, and they'll bring you in. France will bring you in as an Algerian, they'll bring you in as a West African, they'll bring you in and say, hey, come on, give us your labor. As they say, when you win, you're French, when you lose, you're African. And even as they do that, though, they're like, but leave these parts of you outside the field. Leave these parts of your culture outside the field. Leave these parts of your faith and traditions outside of the field. And it's quite disappointing, or it's quite frustrating. It's not disappointing because I don't expect anything different. This is colonizers going to colonize.
I do want to emphasize one thing, that of all the I work at the intersections of justice and sport and race and gender. And never in my life have I ever been so discouraged than after I've spoken to people and women in France, just because of
Really?
how demoralizing it is. And, you know, when you fall in love with sport, it includes you in community, you build friendships. You know, I played soccer my whole life. My daughter plays soccer. My sons play volleyball. Like, you just build communities. They play ball. Like, you all do this. You rip those opportunities away. And just the last thing, when France won the World Cup in 2018, I remember watching when they were invited by President Macron to like the presidential palace. And I remember thinking, how many of the sisters of these players wouldn't be allowed to play football if they wanted to?
Wow. Wow. It's a hell of a thought.